And we need to share the screen. Okay. And yeah, looks like things are going right. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that's working. But let's go ahead and then record. So okay, so this is going to be one of those hours where you're just going to have to listen. Some of you are on your phones, you know, you don't really care. That's fine. That's up to you, whatever you want to do, because you can listen to it again. All right. But I have to get this posted for those who may not be here. So where we last left off, it was a very, very simple point. And that was that a group that came to power, if you want to call it that, after the death of Pericles, basically ended the Athenian century through a thing called demagoguery, right? Let's explain. Yesterday, I thought we, by the way, had a brilliant discussion in this class. We basically played with the Socratic method. And we're looking at this admonition from, we think, Socrates, because actually Socrates never wrote anything down. So it would have been his student Plato who would have maybe heard this from Socrates and immortalized it in basically a play he wrote called The Republic, the first book ever written on political science. So we don't know if this was Socrates talking or Plato talking, but the unexamined life is not worth living. And this whole idea of the Socratic method, why we ask questions, is to really truly understand what we know. When we use a word, do we really know what it even means? And even more importantly, do we understand what other people take it to mean? And so the idea of asking questions to learn the definitions of things and so on is really important. It's really tricky with certain words, like yesterday when we talked about truth, justice, and freedom, because we know that means different things for everybody, right? Other countries have a different definition of truth, freedom, justice, all this kind of stuff. And so we need to understand what other people mean by these terms, as well as maybe clarify what we ourselves understand about those terms. Then we threw out some pretty, interesting questions like, can democracy become tyrannical? Well, obviously, yeah. If the mob gets control, majority rule can be a pretty terrible thing. So here's what I want to tell you. I want you to listen very carefully. The reason the Bill of Rights exists is not to protect the rights of the majority. The majority can protect itself by electing legislators to pass laws that protect their rights. It's there to protect the rights of the minority, to be able to share their ideas and maybe convince a majority later down the road that their position might be a better position. The minority can't protect itself from the majority. They have to be protected with the Bill of Rights and with the rule of law. So that's the genius of the Bill of Rights. Now, the other question we threw out, is it treason or patriotism to challenge your government? It just depends on which side of the argument you're on, doesn't it? To George Washington, yeah, we consider him a patriot now, but for about half of Americans when that war first started, he was causing lots of trouble. He didn't need to, and the British defined him as a treasonous traitor, did they not? Which would have had a death penalty offense to it, by the way. So he put a lot on the line, this George Washington character. But by the same token, today, he's a great patriot. Why? Because they won. Had they lost, the whole history of our continent would have been different, wouldn't it not? So it really is important, right? To look at history and how people, just to evaluate, to think about those things in maybe different ways. Because we're often told the story of the American Revolution in one way. We tell it the American way. And maybe we should also look at it from the British perspective and learn from that. The British learned a lot from the American Revolution. They learned mistakes can be made, and they allowed what the Americans were asking for. And that was a level of home rule for like Canada and Australia and Kenya and so on, which kept their empire strong and sound for the next 150 years. So they learned from their mistakes. And they really do count it as a huge mistake, just like we look at Vietnam and say, whoa, what kind of things can we learn from that? The problem with Athens was simple. After the death of Pericles, they became rudderless. And a very vocal, probably a minority to begin with, called the demagogues. Demagogues basically vilified anybody that disagreed with them. So maybe there was a little bit of intimidation here as well. And so as a result, they came up with a strategy. They were tired of staying behind the walls. They wanted to take the battle to the enemy. What better place to do that than to take a navy, sail to Sicily, and take out a small Spartan garrison, and to take that island for themselves as a colony. It looks like a good plan on paper, and the demagogues were the ones that drove it. So demagoguery in a democracy can really take root. And in this particular case, you understand that the citizens of Athens voted for this, right? They voted to go. Demagoguery is political activity or practices that seek to support by appealing to desires and prejudices. We want to get out from the walls. We want to take the fight to the enemy, that kind of thing, of the ordinary people, rather than using rational argument. Now, the person using rational argument at the time was Socrates. He's questioning the entire strategy. He's saying a lot can go wrong here. Be careful, think it through. That's one thing what I love about our congressional system. Americans are frustrated. Wait a minute, I thought they were going to decide all this last week on the infrastructure bill and all of that. No. It's going to take time. We need to deliberate. And our system requires us to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth so that we make good decisions. If you just rush it, sometimes you can make some huge mistakes. So I appreciate the fact that this is taking a little longer. I think the bill is going to be better because they're going to have to think it through and prove it a little bit more to themselves and to the American people. But when demagoguery takes place, it's usually political opportunists taking advantage of people's emotions and situations in order to rush through bad decisions. And that's what happened in Athens. The Socratic method, which we played with yesterday, where we went and asked you questions, remember, like the whole situation of a young child in the back of the car, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And the answers coming from the parents are, oh yeah, we'll be there in an hour. That child doesn't understand what an hour really means or feels like to them. They don't understand that concept or what 50 miles is or whatever it happens to be. The parents are really not addressing the right question. The question that's really being asked is, I'm bored, what are you going to do about it? Now, your generation's lucky because even in class, when you decide to get bored, you just go to your phones and you just entertain yourselves to no end. And that's what we do with kids now. We hand them the tablet. My day, we didn't have that advantage. So we had to come up with these stupid little games. They were fun. I see with my little eye and all that kind of stuff. And you played any of those in the car games? Yeah, the alphabet one. Yeah. I still do that when I'm falling asleep driving, Anyway, the point is that you have to communicate to people with what they understand. The question, the parents, we're all this way. When somebody asks us a question, we feel obligated to answer. It's kind of almost a human instinct. And then when we answer it and people don't get the answer and we have to explain it again and again, what happens? We get frustrated. Frustration builds. And then we'll say, turn around, put your belt on, be quiet, kind of an attitude. But that's not the real question. The real question is, okay, what's bothering you right now? I'm bored. What can we do to alleviate the boredom? That's the kind of thing that you have to have a dialogue about. Now, the problem with the Socratic method is simple. It can be used as a weapon to embarrass people. I mean, it's really easy. I mean, I think we got close to that in this class. You have to be careful. The Socratic method is not to embarrass people. It shouldn't be used that way. It should be used instead to reach common understandings and definitions and to start where we're all on the same foundation of what we're talking about. Where we don't have somebody over here on the planet Mars and somebody over here on the moon talking past each other, that we're all on Earth talking about the same things. It's apples to apples, oranges to oranges. If you use it properly, you can come to a common definitions. Now, Plato in the book where he lays this out, this idea of logic and rational discussion, the demagogues, he takes them on. He has his character Socrates take on the demagogues at a dinner. And it's easy to catch somebody out who's just acting on emotion or whatever, because you ask them one question, two questions, by the end they get the three questions, they get really frustrated, get really angry, and they show the fact is they really haven't thought it through. And it embarrassed them at the dinner. But then Socrates turns it around to a real discussion and brings that person into the discussion. It's really clever how it's done. Don't use it as a weapon. You can, but don't. Use it as a tool to understand what other people are thinking and feeling, and try to reach common ground. That's really how it should be used, at least in my opinion. His problem is he was asking the demagogues questions. They're talking Socrates now, not the book, the Plato's Republic, in this situation. And these were uncomfortable questions. What if the ships sink? What if the enemy has prepared better than you think? What if you don't coordinate your attack properly? What could go wrong? These were embarrassing questions. And when, guess what? The young people were in on the discussion because they were the ones that were going to have to jump on the boats and do the fighting. So when the demagogues' strategy failed, they didn't blame themselves. Demagogues rarely do. They blame anybody that questioned their strategy, as was the problem. You weren't behind us, and that's why we failed. It wasn't a dumb strategy. It was you, Socrates, asking too many embarrassing questions. Just like people or your life, you need to ask questions about your life. We need to ask questions about our government, local, state. I mean, we got to have serious questions in Utah. We have a serious discussion. Did our state legislature get us through this in the best possible way? It matters who you elect. As Biden said in that great debate, look, I'm not going to answer that question. You answer the question, voter. Go vote. And it's who you elect as a senator that will decide those issues. Socrates was charged with undermining the polis, which today we call treason. And of course, there's an accuser that said Socrates is an evildoer, a curious person, searching into things under the earth and above the skies, and making, by the way, remember this under the earth and above the skies part, and making the worse appear better and teaching all this to others. But just kind of focus on that line, under the earth and above the skies, asking questions, trying to learn. It's proto-science is what it was. It was philosophy in his case, but it's becoming more and more leaning toward the invention of science. He answered his critics, I shall obey the gods rather than you, and I will never cease from the teaching of philosophy, which meant I'm not going to stop thinking. I'm not going to go along with the crowd. If I think you're wrong, I'm going to question it. And oh, by the way, by philosophy, he would also mean proto-science, right? Early versions of science. So they had a big trial. Now the trial then was a democracy. Everybody that was a citizen got to vote. They heard Socrates, they heard the accusers, they heard all this kind of stuff, and a little stunned the fact that, Socrates was unapologetic. In fact, guess what? He even went so far as to say, for all I've done for Athens to try to keep you on the right track, you should reward me by giving me free meals for the rest of my life. I mean, come on, this was quite the trial. And they voted to put him to death, or he could choose exile. Now, as my world history students pointed out to me, and I think I repeated this earlier, but being exiled was a bigger deal religiously in their social and culture than we think, because it cuts you off from your ancestors, from the soil that you were born in, and it had implications. So it wasn't something you did lightly. He didn't take that choice. He instead took death penalty by drinking now the famous hemlock. Socrates, of course, was some inspirational character that influenced Plato. Plato would be the one that would write everything down. Plato wrote the first book of political science called the Republic. That's why we talk about Plato. We can't teach political science and not talk about Plato and his book, The Republic. He had a star student by the name of Aristotle, and this Aristotle would be the person that would really solidify the idea of science. There's so many things, biology, zoology, you just go on any ology you can think of. This guy probably started it. And it was his writings that become kind of the basis that leads us into the future, probably more than anybody else. So of the three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, listen very carefully, Aristotle would have no doubt been the greatest in terms of his contributions. Now, he was also tutor to a not so great student named Alexander, who would just happen to take over the known world, and he became known as Alexander the Great. Just throwing that out there. there is a direct line between Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great, and the Roman Empire, which obviously affects Western civilization. So this is a very important line. Plato, disillusioned with the death of Socrates, does what everybody his age would do, go on vacation. He headed off to explore the world, as maybe many of you are going to do when you graduate. You know, you're going to put a backpack on, you're going to travel through Europe or something like that. They went to Egypt. Egypt was already 2,500 years old. The pyramids were already that old. The pyramids were older to Plato than Plato is to us historically on the timeline. It was a magnificent place. He visited Karnak, he visited Thebes, he visited Giza, all of this stuff. And he gathered inspiration and everything along the way. By the way, there would have been people that actually would have been able to read the hieroglyphs in this time period. He returned to Athens, though, now with renewed energy, and starts a school that he called the Academy. And as you all know, the name Academy for Utah County Academy of Sciences comes directly from this. The idea that we have schools that let you explore your own thinking and that give you this chance to earn a university degree and just, you know, blow the lid off of the opportunities that you potentially have is what the Academy is all about. And this was a traveling kind of conversation that they'd have every day. Students would gather around, they'd have these dialogues, they'd have these discussions. Now, that leads us to this. For them, communicating information was a simple matter of, talking. When we say he wrote the first book on political science, the thing about it is that there wouldn't have been a lot of books. Books would have been few and far between, but what they would do was turn what they had written into plays. And so a lot of people would experience all this in the form of theater, which is interesting. For us, though, this was back about a time Obama was elected. I asked the question I asked you guys yesterday, where do you get your information from? Notice they were still reading newspapers then, some students. Radio was big. You guys, of course, you stream now. You don't listen to radio much. Some do. TV news was still huge. The internet, this was the first year the internet became the biggest source of the students' source of information. And by here, and when I say internet now, we're just talking web pages here, because there's no Facebook, there's no TikTok, there's none of that. So this is just looking at web pages, like going to CNN.com and seeing what the news is. Cell phones were just these primitive things that you could text with and do phone calls on. There were the flip phones. You guys, too early for you? You guys, anybody ever have one? Really? Still? Okay, so you can relate to that. All right, well, now look what happened just a few years later. All the rest of the media just dropped off like a rock. And this became the whole source as the apps started to appear, right? Now, what I meant to do with yesterday's question and failed to do was that I meant to try to dissect this category, right? And I didn't do a very good job with that first question, so I'm going to have to repeat it next semester. But I can maybe go in here and show you at least a partial answer of breaking that in. What you get your stuff from online sources, basically 95% of what you hear comes from an online source. And let's just go to the project. Let's see if I can find it really fast. Here's the media one. And I apologize for the first question. It was poorly worded. And again, what we learned about social media and its harmful effects was stunning yesterday. This was the badly worded question. The one at the bottom was a little better, and at least it starts to get to the specifics where you're looking for your information. And notice none of you actually use the Facebook app anymore. And I know pretty much everybody I know has given it up too. It was too toxic. It was a ridiculous joke, and people saw through it. But then Instagram was a small company who was now attracting all those people. They did a brilliant job of sharing images, and it was all positive and whatever. I know my wife, when she switched, she was so excited about it, whatever. And so it started to steal customers from Facebook. So what does Facebook do? They buy it, creating a monopoly. And just wait for it. I'm just going to predict something. Tell me if I'm wrong. But in about 5 years from now, you know that the algorithms they're using on Facebook now are going to be used in Instagram too, right? Are you already seeing the erosion? How many have noticed an erosion already in that? Okay, It's going to get worse because their goal is to make money. Now, is that a good thing that businesses make money? Yeah, I mean, that's what they're all about. But this one is particularly interesting because they have crossed over into a virtual monopoly. In some places they are. They have almost 4 billion users. Is this an American company? If they lose all their Facebook customers in the United States, what they do is just buy the next biggest app and monetize it. But all over the world, they still have a huge, huge footprint with the original app. Philippines, for example, it's like them. There are countries that are totally dependent. This is the main source of information for people is Facebook. So they are a worldwide corporation. And if they lost the entire US market, it wouldn't really matter. Yeah, they have a headquarters here, but they're not an American company. They're an international company. And any good, successful company like Apple is going to be international. Google's international too. All I'm saying is, guys, is that their algorithm keeps track of every little bit of information they can glean from your phone. They know where you go, where you live, where you shop, what you buy online, what your interests are. It's all being recorded as a profile. Now, they also can figure out what your discretionary income is, whether you have extra money to spend on something or not. And they can take that one little tiny segment of customers, let's say young women between ages 16 and 18, and then take the ones with the discretionary income. They're going to leave everybody else out, but they're going to charge a premium to the people who want to sell to that category for that information. So you get ads from those specific companies and they're going to pay a lot. Every single person on Facebook earns them $50. It's $50 per customer. Now, if you have 4 billion users times $50, what are we talking there? It's a manipulation, people, and it disguises itself as a social media platform. This is the question, I think, where I kind of got it right and where we're heading for today. Where are you getting your information? YouTube, TikTok, Discord, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, WhatsApp, Reddit, social media. None. I love that one. Yeah, that was cool. But this is more what I was looking for, right? Snapchat is particularly high. Okay, so, and YouTube. All right, so this is kind of continuing this. Where do you get your media from? And the reason we're doing this as an exploration is because I'm about to share with you Plato's allegory of the cave. Now raise your hand if you've ever heard the allegory of the cave, okay? See, look at the hands go up. My guess is, though, it came out in some sort of philosophy class or an English class or something else, right? They are all thieves. They stole this. This is a political science thing. And yet the metaphor is so elegantly done that it works in all sorts of different subjects. You can draw so many different conclusions. If you actually read the original, there are so many nuances to it that you can take this in so many different directions. It's really beautifully written. That's why 2,400 years later, we're still talking about it. Well, let's give you the political science version of this. You ready? So basically, all of humanity, all of us, live in a deep cave. All right. Now, there's a wall, and we're all chained to that wall. Knowingly or unknowingly, we're all chained to the wall. Now, the thing is about the wall, I mean, there's certain days it's warm in the cave, you know, you get plenty of food, right? You get to eat, you have chains on your arms and legs, but you can chat with the people next to you. So you have the social thing going on with your friends next door, and then you can eat, you know, and all that. And then you get to watch a wonderful show every day. Because up on the wall above you, on the back of the cave, you see these wonderful figures, and there's a dialogue, and it's like one constant entertainment. So it's not so bad. But then, as the story goes, someone actually somehow, never explained how, but slips the chains. By the way, you can get into a long discussion about what that means, which we won't do today. But somebody slips the chains and stumbles over around the back of the wall. going, oh, wait a minute, the chains are gone. Let's go see what's over here. As soon as you round that corner, you're faced with a bright fire. Now, you all experienced this morning. My mom had this ritual. When it was time to get up and go to school, she would walk into the room, open the door, flip the light on, and say, "Good morning, sunshine." And it hurt. How many got hit by the light this morning when the lights went on? You know what I'm talking about, right? So I grab the blanket, cover my head up, but when the light hits you fast, you've all experienced this, it hurts. And so here's what you do. This person after person who's maybe slipped their chains, they see that, you feel that pain, and they immediately run back and put the chains back on because it hurts. But some brave soul, maybe they weren't a brave soul, maybe they just tripped, who knows? But by the time they can get up and to run away, their eyes have adjusted and it doesn't hurt anymore. They see the fire for what it is. And they also see the puppeteers holding the puppets up above the wall and doing their dialogues. And the person then sitting there looking up at this goes, everything I have ever heard my entire life is a lie. It's all a lie. Now, this might have special import. Remember when it was written. Do you remember the Athenians built a wall and they were inside that wall, trapped because of the Spartan army outside, and they're listening to Pericles and his oration of hubris? And when Pericles dies, wasn't it the demagogues now providing the show? And it would lead to the failure of Athens. Instead of becoming Rome, they became an afterthought. So this person realizes, oh my goodness, everything they've said is just, it's not true. And disillusioned, kind of stumbles around and sees a light in the far end and realizes that they're in some sort of cave. I guess here's a better picture of that. And starts to move their way out. Now, let's go back to this picture. When you first come out of the cave, the light is much brighter. The sun is a billion times more bright than the fire, but prior experience matters. Because you've gone through the pain once, you realize that if you can stand it for a little bit, your eyes will adjust. And for the first time in your life, you see the color green. You see blue. You see birds, not just bats. You see birds, maybe the ocean, maybe a mountain or two, and trees. This has got to be an unbelievable experience. To shed your prejudices and everything else. Oh, by the way, you can use a lot of metaphors, a lot of things you can do with this one, but truth hurts. Learning the truth hurts. Getting an education hurts. It shouldn't be easy to get a college degree. It should be painful to go through that math until you get it. And if you get it, the next time you're faced with an equally challenging subject, what are you going to do? You're going to be better at taking it on. If you don't feel a little pain, there is no gain. And truth hurts. So, as the story goes, this brave, intrepid person runs back down the cave, runs to their friends behind the wall and says, hey, folks, you know what? There's this whole world out there. You can't believe what blue looks like. And there's actual birds, not these bats. We see birds, they're different. And there's elephants, and there's all sorts of things. It starts describing all this. And what do the people chained to the wall think immediately? It's crazy, out of control. And in this allegory, that person is put to death. There's an old scriptural reference that says this: you're never a prophet in your own country. And so what happens here is that nobody else learns from the experience. And when you look at the demagogues, giving them stories and keeping them chained behind those walls, But when those walls came down, because Lysander had invaded and won the war that they thought was totally impossible, made him take those walls down brick by brick. Now that had to be painful. Truth hurts. Reality hurts. And that's why we want to use the Socratic method, because we want to figure out what we really know and what we think we know. And again, normal year, I would do it differently, but we have to record this. But I kept this in the lecture. I didn't change it in any way, because we were asking way back, is Obama the best or worst president in 50 years? We asked it with George W. Bush. We asked it with Trump. We asked it with Biden. This essay question's always been intriguing, because it allows you to think outside of what's really going on at this point to what could happen. And if it doesn't, here's the consequences. We're asking you not to listen to the demagogues, not to listen to your own prejudice, whatever, but to research possibilities and probabilities and to see what could happen. And guess what? What could go wrong? We're asking you to do what Socrates was asking all of Athens to do. Where can we go right and where can we go wrong? And again, getting back to a defense of our system, don't you feel comforted a little bit that Congress is not deciding this in a day, but taking a few months to try to get it right, rather than rushing ahead with $3.5 trillion of spending when we're not sure that that money is really going to impact the country in a positive way? So I think they're going to get a better bill as a. And then there's the old standbys. What is freedom? Here's one. How is freedom defined in America differently than in other cultures? Huh? All my friends who travel a lot tell me the most free country in the world is what? They all say the Netherlands. Wouldn't it be interesting to see how they value freedom versus how we do? That'd be fun, right? And then you look at others. What is the American dream? Which is always a lot of fun to ask when we have a lot of exchange students in the room. But the American dream, the definition of it is changing. And oh, by the way, do you know this concept just came up at a particular point in time, that it didn't exist in the early days of the American dream? Well, let's define that one day. What comes first, the right to life or the Second Amendment? You know, we had that school shooting in Texas just yesterday. That's a tough one. That's also fun to discuss. It's because people really can get into that one. One of my favorites was, is climate change real? When I first started asking this question, the majority of the students didn't believe it was real. At least it wasn't caused by man. That was interesting. Do deficits matter? This one turned out to be great. Should the game of football be banned as a hazardous activity? Not soccer. I'm talking about hit him in the head with the football helmet thing. That's been fun to do. Anyway, always end with this. What would the founding fathers say? You know what they would do? They would argue. They would discuss and they would debate. They would disagree, and then they'd change their minds later. And that's really what we should do too. And you know, they were all readers. Many of them could read Greek. Many of them could read Latin. And many of them were reading these books in the original. So when we get to the books that we're going to go through that establish political science, understand that the framers of our Constitution were a very well-educated, literate group. And they were the ones that set this Constitution in motion 250 years ago. What would they say? Well, first of all, they disagree a lot, which isn't that what we should do? But use the Socratic method to come to conclusion at some point, because you got to have a path forward. So with that, we're just going to kind of stop with that. Hopefully, we'll stop the share. Hopefully, we'll